Welcome back, everybody. The big news this weekend, Jaden Daniels out of LSU, winning the Heisman. In second place, a close second, Michael Penix Jr. In third place, Bo Nix. Marvin Harrison Jr. came in fourth. And looking at the breakdown, I was actually just looking at this again. In no zone did he come in higher than fourth. Even in the Midwest, he had 106 votes, and Bo Nix outpaced him by 13 votes. So, not to be a bit of a bee about this, but what was the point of having Marvin Harrison Jr. there when, quite frankly, he was a distant fourth here? And this thing really came down to Jaden Daniels and Michael Penix Jr. Like, was Marvin only invited because it's a TV show and we want to spend 88 minutes talking about people before the 2 minutes that we actually award them the Heisman? Just asking that out loud to a friend.
It definitely felt that way. I mean, they had an opportunity basically to get an NFL Hall of Famer on screen, right? Oh, hey, let's sit down with you and your dad and your brother and talk about how your dad inspired you and coached you and turned you into the receiver that you are today. Like that was must see TV for them, 100%. It's fascinating. Listen, I think he deserved to be there. To me, I think the results of the voting just kind of spoke to the fact that it is really hard to win that award if you're not a quarterback. And it's the same thing we see in the NFL with the MVP, right? I think at this point the NFL is kind of established, well, offensive player of the year will go to whatever skill position has a great year, and the MVP is just always going to be a quarterback award and there's nothing you can do about it. And that kind of feels like what it became with the Heisman in most cases. I mean, Smith was the first wide receiver since the 90s to win the award. So it's like, I think that's just kind of what it is. But I think it's interesting, though, Nick, because we've talked a lot about if the Michigan game goes differently, what does that mean for Marvin Harrison Jr.? And I stand by what I've been saying. I feel like if they win that game, and especially if he scores the game-winning touchdown for sure, but even if they win that game, he makes a big maybe catch on that drive, like the ball that was going his way that was intercepted, obviously, to end it. If something like that happens, how do you not give it to him? Because we talked about it last week. Like every single candidate you could poke holes in. Jaden Daniels, yeah, he had all the stats, but he also had 3 losses at LSU, and his team wasn't very good. Like, was he really lifting them to that next level? With Penix, I think was maybe the most well-rounded one because you had at least something you could look at and see, like, well, that's his Heisman moment. He's got some of the stats as well, but his numbers.
Can I just say that? Beating the best team in your own conference, beating every team in your conference in a tough Pac-12, that doesn't matter as much as putting up video game stats on a 3-loss team.
It's the SEC thing again, right? Like, oh, he did that in the SEC. Holy shit, we got to give this guy the Heisman. Like, that's
but if you want to start where the Heisman is, the overwhelming amount of votes that Jaden Daniels got in every zone, like even Bo Nix didn't outpace Jaden Daniels in the Pac-12. They hate themselves in that territory. I'm talking about in the West voting. So if we want to start fixing the Heisman, let's start there. Because the group think on Jaden Daniels. Now I'm getting pissy, all right, because I am officially down 3 cocktails. I'm getting a little pissy about this. Jaden Daniels is a really great college football player. Don't get me wrong. But if Bo Nix was still in the SEC, he would have split enough votes and Michael Penix Jr. would have won. And it's just like to be a Pac-12 player or to be from that part of the country where nobody watches you, you pretty much have to go undefeated. You have to pass for 7,000 yards. You have to nail the Playboy Playmate of the Year. You have to date Taylor Swift. Like you have to like the idea
or in the case of like Reggie Bush, you have to be like maybe the most transcendent college football player of all time, because that's what Reggie Bush was. People stayed up till 2 a.m. to watch Reggie Bush play Fresno State, which I remember that game vividly, watching in my parents' basement. Like that game against Fresno State where he just had like 5 touchdowns and he was just going bonkers. It was like, this guy's amazing. Like that's what it takes basically. And you can make the case with like Christian McCaffrey, who I think, by the way, I thought Christian McCaffrey should have won the Heisman that year that he didn't, but that was just me.
But even then, Spence, like Reggie Bush was a number 1 recruit out of high school. He
Yeah,
was
true.
high profile. It was LA. Like Michael Penix Jr. was an okay recruit that has started at Indiana that nobody watched. And then he went to Washington where all he did was win and it wasn't enough. And, getting back to the Marvin thing, like, I'll be honest, I think if you had told Marvin, hey, you're going to be a distant fourth, I don't know Marvin would have gone. I don't know Marvin should have gone.
I think he would have.
In
I
the
just think that's not it. I think his mentality is he would have showed up.
if he had known for a fact he was going to be fourth, I don't know. And his because I think you're kind of attributing to his character and what a good
Yeah,
kid he
yeah.
is. But like I think he would have seen he was just a pawn. Now you pointed out to the butterfly effect here, which I think is interesting. So I'm gonna draw out the details here. And because I'm curious. If it's the exact same stat line, 118 yards, one touchdown, and Kyle McCord leads the team down the field at the end there, and somebody else scores. So Marvin doesn't have another catch. But Ohio State outlasts Michigan. Is Marvin a Heisman winner?
I think so because he would have been a key contributor in that game, which was then his Heisman moment. And then you also have to add in, like, if we're doing the butterfly effect here, the butterfly effect of winning that game is that he then goes and plays in the Big Ten championship game, where I'm assuming he would have put up some really good numbers again, or I don't know, add another touchdown or something. I know that Iowa defense is stingy as hell. That's about all they're good for. But yeah, like I'm imagining that he also adds more to his resume on top of that. So then I think yes, he has a better case to being at least up there to have a shot at it because of all that. Like listen, you can't tell me if you watch college football consistently, you can't tell me that guy Marvin Harrison Jr. wasn't. Listen, he's on a stage with a lot of other really good players, but you can't tell me that he wasn't top two in terms of like the best players in college football this year. And I think that certainly speaks to where he's going to likely be picked in the NFL draft, assuming he's going to actually go pro, which we both think he's. There's no way he's coming back. Like the talent is undeniable. Like that guy is insanely talented to a point where like you can solely look at the Ohio State season and say, where are they without him? Where was like all the people who are pointing to Kyle McCord's numbers and saying, oh, well, how are they going to let this guy go? Where would his numbers be without Marvin Harrison Jr.? I can't wrap my head around what this team would have been like without him. So if the Heisman's supposed to sort of be in that ilk of an MVP award, I do wonder, how much that gets considered for a player that's maybe not a quarterback when that player still had an immense impact on how that team's season played out. Like his impact is undeniable.
So I think next year, I think we need to do a preseason watch list.
Okay.
And we need to come up with our own Heisman. We have to come up with some name for it. And then we have a preseason watch list. And then starting with like week 3 or week 4, once you get 2, 3, 4 games under your belt, every week, it's like the college football playoff rankings. Every week we release our top 5.
I like
and we
that.
release our ballot. And we'll let the fans be 33% of the votes, right? And I don't really know how we'll do that, but we'll do it. Like we'll effing do it.
Twitter polls.
And then at the end of the season, we declare the rightful best player in college football. Because Michael Penix Jr. got robbed. Marvin, to some degree, got robbed. I think Bo Nix is overrated. Great, really, really great college football player. He's not the same level. He's not the same level of Michael Penix Jr., who is just an otherworldly, has the it factor. Bo Nix lived up to his recruitment. That's the best thing. Really good player. Great player. Like Michael Penix Jr. has had an all-time season. And then Jaden Daniels would have been – so I would have gone Michael Penix Jr., Marvin, and then Jaden. But that's this year. Next year, we're going to do it all over again. Now, you mentioned – I mentioned the Marvin Harrison Jr. butterfly effect. I also think it's fair to do the same thing with Kyle McCord. And ask yourself, if Kyle McCord, and obviously he'd still be the quarterback right now because he would have beaten Michigan, but if he drives down the field and beats Michigan, regardless of what happens in the playoffs,
I love this conversation.
Is he the starting quarterback for Ohio State in 2024?
Yeah, I think he is. That's what's so crazy about both. Yes, college football, but just football in general. It's like one or two things here or there, one or two moments, one or two plays. I mean, we do the same thing with the looking back at the Georgia playoff game last year. If Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't get knocked out of that game with a head injury, and let's face it, Ohio State was really banging their own drum about this idea that,
I
like,
didn't know where we were going with that. Ohio State was banging.
Ohio State was banging their own drum about how, hey, we take protecting players and, player safety, especially with head injuries, more seriously than other teams do. And when you hear the stories about how Rodemaker from Florida State got a head injury the game he got injured in against Florida, and then he went back into the game, and then you find out that he couldn't play in the ACC championship game because he had a head injury. I think it's pretty telling that they were like, yeah, he's okay, just the old-fashioned rub some dirt on it, get back out there type mentality. And it's the same sort of thing. Like we're doing that with Marvin Harrison Jr. from last year. So I think it's a fascinating question to wonder where Kyle McCord is if he wins that game. I'd be hard pressed to think that they move on from him if they win that game. Because, I mean, Nick, think about how much stock fans are putting in just that game alone. I mean, that game is the difference between Ryan Day should be the head coach still here today as we're sitting and talking about this, or he should be fired. Like, for a lot of people, he should be fired because he lost that game alone. But it's funny if he goes down the field and wins that game, and if Kyle McCord delivers that moment and they get off the field with a victory, people are like, okay, Ryan Day can stay. Like, that one moment decides the entire perspective that people have on Ryan Day, the entire perspective people have on Kyle McCord, the entire perspective people have on Marvin Harrison Jr.'s Heisman candidacy. It's so fascinating, and I would be hard-pressed to think that they would move on from Kyle McCord because I think from their perspective, Ryan Day would basically just be able to say, I was right. I'm a quarterback guru. I'm a quarterback whisperer. Look what I got out of Kyle McCord. You guys kept telling me he wasn't good. You said in training camp in the preseason, this quarterback competition between him and Devin Brown, it wasn't like both of them stunk, and we had our hands tied, and I still went out and beat Michigan with this team. Now we're on our way to the college football playoff with this guy under center. Like, I did everything that I needed to do. So I think it does completely flip if he wins this game. Yes, I don't think he's going anywhere.
So I want to go through this one by one. One, I don't think Ryan Day beating Michigan would have completely absolved him from the scorn of Buckeye fans. I think the only thing that will ever rightfully do that is the year that he beats Michigan and wins a national title. Until he does both things, and if it's a year that he wins, so even if he beat Michigan next year, lost out in the playoffs.
That, though? I mean, Nick, we got fans telling us that game matters more than anything. Like you even threw out the question. I remember on your show on 92 through the Fan, you asked people, would you rather beat Michigan or win a national championship? And you had callers, full phone lines lining up to tell you, I'd rather beat Michigan than win a national championship, which I think is asinine. But
I think the thing that most of this year proved to me is that when you're in the situation that Ryan is, it's always going to be a moving goalpost until you have done both things. And, Urban, what was it, year two, year three, won the national title and beat Michigan's ass the entirety of the time he was there. And I think if you move the national title back a couple years, I think fans 4 years in, 5 years in would have been saying, well, okay, he's beating Michigan, but so was Tress. What's he doing on the national stage? So I think fans move the goalposts all the time. I think media does it as well. Now, to the Marvin thing, if the only difference, if the performance was good enough, it's just the end result of the game, then those voters are dumber than I think they are. And then getting to the third thing, if the answer is yes, that if Kyle McCord wins this game, no matter what happens in the college football playoffs, he's back as your starting quarterback next year, unchallenged. It's his job. And then he's off to the NFL, and it's Aaron Nolan's job. If that is true, then we need to realize, and if that's 100% how Ryan Day would think about it, then we need to realize that Kyle McCord was probably the fall guy for Ryan Day losing to Michigan for the third straight year. And I'm not saying it isn't, but I'm just And maybe that's the design of this. Maybe that was always the conceit of this year is, well, Marvin was going to go off to the NFL anyways, and if he's not good enough, we'll just use him as the fall guy. That'll buy me some time. But if the answer is it's one drive, and that one drive, not the fact the kid was a one-read pony, not the fact that the guy was nervous as hell behind behind the offensive line, the fact that he honestly was inconsistent as hell with his ball placement. He has an okay arm, not a great arm. If it's none of he's immobile. If it wasn't those five things and it was just one drive, then this program's probably in deeper shit than we realize. Because one drive, and I get it, it's a huge drive, and he threw the interception. But if it's one drive that differentiates him being here and him not being here, to me, that is the definition of insanity. Just putting way too much stock. Because honestly, that one drive would absolve him in the eyes of a lot of Ohio State fans for the crappy play earlier in the game. It shouldn't. He played really poorly.
Yeah,
he was not crisp. He did not make good decisions. He started the game with the biggest interception that obviously put Michigan right there to on the doorstep to score their first points. He started you at a deficit, and that completely changed everything about that game. So the idea one throw or one drive could outdo that. He beating Michigan wouldn't have proved that he was any more likely or ready to be in that game because he still played like crap for 3.5 quarters.
I just go back to the point I made on. I think if he beats Michigan with Kyle McCord, I think the narrative can be more about how Ryan Day. Everyone says like Ryan Day's supposed to be this quarterback whisperer. I think that's what it becomes. I think it becomes like, look what he got out of Kyle McCord. Like all those limitations, it almost becomes like a Ryan Day love fest instead. It's like, oh, Ryan Day did this. He led Kyle McCord to this place that he hasn't been to, and he got it done with that quarterback. This guy's a genius. And so I think because he would have won that game, he buys himself more time with the fan base where he can then bring Kyle McCord back the next year. And if it doesn't go great that year, then he can use him as a fall guy anyway again. And then he's got Aaron Nolan ready to go. So, but again, I continue to go back to the fact that I don't think it was designed that way. We all know Quinn Ewers was supposed to be here. I also think too, Nick, like I think that's true for not just Ohio State, not just for college football, but all levels of football. Sometimes it does come down to one or two plays. I mean, I've seen coaches at MAC programs get fired because they lose a game that if they converted a 2-point conversion, they wouldn't have been getting fired the next day, but they're fired the next day because they lost a game by a point. Like I'm an example from this week, all the heat in the NFL that Sean McDermott's dealing with the article that Ty Dunn put out this week. And he goes out and he doesn't technically beat the Chiefs because the Chiefs scored a touchdown that would have put them ahead of the Bills. But because Kadarius Toney's a moron, he wins that game. And now all of a sudden, everyone to the victor goes the spoils. Everyone's like, oh, Sean McDermott. Oh, they counted him out all week and he rallied the troops. Look at him go. That's my coach. Like the narrative completely changes. Like I do think that one or two moments sometimes do define how we view a player or a coach or whatever. And I think that would have been the case in this situation. And maybe I'm leaning too much into like the fan perspective of it all. And that's not how internally it would have been viewed. But I just think Ryan Day would have held tightly onto this idea that Kyle McCord had limitations and look what he did with him. And that would have been his calling card to bring him back for next season. I really do.
Yeah, and the moving goalpost to be until he loses to the Cowboys this week. All right, guys, we've got a little bit longer to go here, but you guys can get at the show at Nick Wilson Says, at Spencito_. Make sure to follow the show wherever you get your podcasts, so on and so forth. But when we come back, we will have to get into the importance of the Cotton Bowl, our first look at Ohio State's final game of the 2023 season. That's coming up next, but first, a word of our sponsors.